The dust settled over the small frontier town of Red Creek as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the wooden boardwalk. Sarah stood at the edge of the general store, her small cloth bag clutched tightly in trembling hands. At 18, she possessed a kind of innocence that seemed almost out of place in this harsh world. Wide eyes that still held wonder despite the cruelty she had witnessed, and a heart that hadn't yet learned to harden itself against disappointment. Her father had gambled away everything. The farm, the livestock, even the few pieces of her mother's jewelry that Sarah had hoped to keep as memories. When the debts became too heavy and the creditors too insistent, he had made one final, desperate bargain. Sarah would marry James McCready, a rancher twice her age who lived alone in the hills outside town. In exchange, her father's debts would be cleared, and he could start fresh somewhere else, without her. She had cried for 3 days when she learned of the arrangement. Her father couldn't meet her eyes as he explained that she was being sold into marriage, though he dressed it up with words like arrangement and opportunity. The transaction had been made, papers signed, and money exchanged. She was to become the wife of a man she had never met, a lonely cowboy who needed a woman to keep his house and warm his bed. James McCready arrived in town on a Thursday morning, riding a sturdy black horse and leading a mare meant for Sarah. He was 40 years old, with a weathered face that spoke of decades under the unforgiving sun. His beard was more gray than brown, and his eyes carried a weariness that made him seem even older. He wore simple clothes, a worn jacket, dusty trousers, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his features. When Sarah first saw him, her heart sank. This was to be her husband, this tired, silent man who looked at her as one might assess a piece of livestock at market. He barely spoke as her father hurriedly made introductions, eager to complete the transaction and leave town before guilt could root him in place. "She's a good girl," her father had said, his voice hollow. "Works hard. Can cook and sew. Won't give you no trouble." James had simply nodded, then turned to Sarah. "Get your things. We leave in an hour." The ride to his ranch took most of the day. They traveled in silence, Sarah fighting back tears as the familiar landmarks of her childhood disappeared behind them. James rode ahead, never looking back to see if she was keeping pace. The landscape grew more rugged and isolated with each passing mile. His ranch sat in a valley surrounded by rocky hills. The house was modest, a 2-room cabin with a small barn and corral nearby. It was clear that James lived alone and had for some time. Everything was functional but bare, lacking any warmth or decoration that might make it feel like a home. "You'll sleep in there," James said, pointing to the smaller of the 2 rooms. "Il tek de ader. There's water from the well outside. Superesse ati sundown." Sarah nodded mutely, too overwhelmed to speak. She had expected him to assert his rights as her husband immediately, as her father had grimly warned her might happen. But James simply showed her where things were kept, then went outside to tend to the horses. That first night, Sarah lay awake on the narrow bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the wilderness around her. She heard James moving in the other room, the creak of the floorboards as he settled down for the night. She waited in fearful anticipation for him to come to her door, but he never did. Days turned into weeks, and a strange pattern emerged. James treated her not as a wife, but more like a hired hand or perhaps a distant relative staying temporarily. He was polite but distant, speaking only when necessary. He never touched her, never even came close to her. They took their meals in awkward silence, and at night, they retired to their separate rooms. Sarah found herself confused by this arrangement. She had been terrified of being forced into intimacy with a stranger, yet his complete indifference seemed almost insulting. Was she so unappealing? Or was there something else at play? She began to observe him more carefully. James worked from dawn until dusk, maintaining the ranch with meticulous care. He was gentle with the animals, patient when things went wrong, and surprisingly skilled at tasks that required delicate work. Sometimes she caught him staring at the distant hills with an expression of profound sadness. One evening, about a month after her arrival, Sarah gathered the courage to break their usual silence. "Why did you buy me?" she asked quietly as they sat at the dinner table. James looked up, surprised by the directness of her question. He set down his fork and regarded her for a long moment. "I didn't buy you," he said finally. I paid off your father's debts. There's a difference. But you expected a wife in return. I expected nothing, he replied. Your father offered the arrangement. I accepted because I thought maybe you'd prefer living here to whatever other fate awaited you if those creditors got hold of him. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. So this is charity? Call it what you want. James stood, taking his plate to the basin. You're free to leave any time. I won't stop you. And go where? Sarah's voice rose with frustration. I have nothing. No family, no money, no place to go. James turned to face her, and for the first time, she saw something crack in his carefully maintained distance. Then stay. Work if you want to earn your keep. Or don't. Makes no difference to me. He walked out into the night, leaving Sarah alone with her churning thoughts. The next morning, Sarah began truly working the ranch alongside James. If she was going to stay, she decided, she would earn her place honestly. She learned to milk the cow, tend the chickens, and help with the endless tasks that came with maintaining a homestead. James taught her patiently when she asked questions, and gradually, their conversations extended beyond mere practicalities. She learned that James had been married before. His wife, Catherine, had died in childbirth along with their baby daughter 7 years ago. He had loved her deeply, and her loss had broken something fundamental in him. He had withdrawn from the world, content to live alone with his grief and his work. Then why agree to marry again? Sarah asked one afternoon as they repaired a section of fence. Loneliness is a slow death, James admitted quietly. I thought maybe having someone here would help. But I couldn't. He trailed off, struggling with the words. I couldn't bear the thought of replacing her. Of pretending you were something you weren't. Sarah felt understanding dawn. So you keep me at a distance. I keep everyone at a distance, he corrected. Except Catherine's memory. As autumn arrived and the air turned crisp, something began to shift between them. Their conversations grew longer and more personal. James started teaching Sarah to ride properly, to shoot for hunting, to read the weather signs in the clouds. She, in turn, brought small touches of warmth to the cabin. Wildflowers in a jar, curtains for the windows, better meals cooked with more care. One cold night, a storm rolled through the valley with frightening intensity. The wind howled and rain lashed against the cabin walls. Sarah lay in her bed, trying not to show fear, when she heard a gentle knock at her door. Sarah! James's voice came through. You all right in there? Yes, she called back, though her voice wavered. There was a pause. Catherine was terrified of storms, he said softly. I used to sit with her until they passed. Would you like company? Sarah opened the door to find James standing there with a lamp, looking uncertain and vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. Yes, she said. I would. They sat together on the small bed, James in a chair he had brought from the other room, and talked through the storm. He told her stories about Catherine, not with the desperate clinging of someone refusing to let go, but with the warm fondness of someone finally able to remember love without drowning in grief. Sarah told him about her mother, who had died when she was young, and about the dreams she had once held before circumstances crushed them. As the storm subsided and dawn began to break, James stood to leave. At the door, he paused. Thank you, he said, for listening. For being patient with a foolish old man. You're not old, Sarah said with a small smile. Just wounded. We both are. From that night forward, their relationship began to transform. It happened gradually, naturally, like ice melting in spring sunshine. They began taking meals together with genuine conversation. James started asking about Sarah's day, her thoughts, her feelings. Sarah found herself seeking his company not from obligation but from genuine desire. Winter arrived, bringing with it the isolation that comes when snow blankets the world. The ranch became their entire universe, and within that confined space, intimacy grew. Not the physical intimacy that had been the presumed purpose of their arrangement, but something deeper, the intimacy of two wounded souls learning to trust again. James taught Sarah to play chess in the evenings, and she taught him the songs her mother had sung to her. They read together from his small collection of books, taking turns reading aloud. When Sarah fell ill with fever, James tended to her with gentle care, sitting beside her bed through long nights. When James injured his hand while working, Sarah cleaned and dressed the wound with steady hands, her touch careful and kind. One evening in late February, as they sat by the fire after dinner, James reached out and took Sarah's hand. It was the first time he had deliberately touched her in such an intimate way. She looked at him, surprised, and found his eyes full of something she hadn't seen there before: hope. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. "When I agreed to your father's arrangement, I thought I was doing something practical. Getting help with the ranch, having someone to cook and clean. I told myself it was a business arrangement and nothing more." He paused, struggling with the words. Sarah squeezed his hand encouragingly. "But you've become something I never expected," he continued. "Somewhere along the way, without meaning to, I started to heal. And I realized I was falling in love with you, not as a replacement for Catherine, but as yourself. As Sarah, the brave girl who came here with nothing and turned this house into a home." Sarah felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I was so scared when I came here," she whispered. "Scared of you, of this life, of everything. But you gave me something I never expected. Time. Time to be just myself. Time to heal from my own wounds. Time to discover that maybe I could love someone who had hurt the way you had." "And have you?" James asked softly. "Discovered that, I mean?" Sarah smiled through her tears. "Yes. I love you, James. Not because I'm bound to you by some transaction, but because you're kind and patient and good. Because you respected me when you didn't have to. Because you let me choose this in the end." James pulled her close, and for the first time, they embraced as husband and wife in truth, not in name only. No one in Red Creek could have predicted this ending, that a transaction born of desperation and loneliness would transform into genuine love. That two broken people would find healing in each other's company. That what began as a sale would end as a choice freely made. In the years that followed, their ranch prospered, but more importantly, so did they. Sarah never forgot the frightened girl who had arrived that first day, and James never forgot the hollow man who had bought her freedom with gold. But they also didn't dwell on those memories. Instead, they built a life together, one day at a time, proving that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings can lead to the most beautiful endings. Their love wasn't born of passion or convenience, but of patience, respect, and the slow, careful building of trust between two souls who had learned that healing is possible, even when you think you're beyond repair.